Hello puppies and kittens, this is R and Raw. This is another episode of the Raw Men, and today we're talking with Alison Gill, who's Vice President of Policy and Legal at American Atheists, and we just want to talk about what does American Atheists do. I mean, I have to, in full disclosure, I am on the board of directors of American Atheists. It's an organization that I care about very much. Was founded right about when I was born by Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who was famously declared to be the world's most hated woman simply because she stopped teachers from forcing their religion onto children of other faiths, and Christians, for some reason, didn't understand why that was a problem. Yeah. Probably because they're in the majority, and it was usually Christian teachers doing that. But I tell you, if these people were to go to a Sharia country, or if a teacher were from another faith, like a Hindu faith, were to say word one of her prayer or her belief to those kids, there would obviously be a problem.
Absolutely.
So people never understand the value of secularism until they realize that they don't have it. Yeah. So, Alison, what is it that American Atheists does, and why is it a valuable organization? What is it doing now?
Absolutely. So we work in a few different areas. I manage our DC office, which focuses on both litigation and also advocacy and policy. And over the last few years, we've really shifted our approach to focus on the states. So we focus on we of course do work at the federal level as well, but we really focus on state level supporting law, bills or opposing bad bills. And not only do we do it through traditional advocacy means like speaking with lawmakers, we really want to do that by empowering local advocates. So we have a lot of organizing capacity, and we work very closely with affiliates. We have a whole network of sort of grassroots volunteers called state directors and assistant state directors in different states, and coordinate with them, who also coordinate with the affiliates in the local groups. So our goal is to create this network across the country to both build these communities, be engaged together, and also work on state level advocacy. So it's been really, and of course we do other things around communications and engaging online, and I mentioned litigation, but that's been a major focus over the last couple of years. It's really our state level work.
So is there still anything left to do these days? I mean,
well, that's why we're doing state level stuff, because the federal level, I'll tell you, it's challenging right now, right? I mean, we have maybe not the most friendly administration to church-state separation, probably the least friendly we've had, honestly.
Well, I'm going to ask you to just do a quick summary on what the church-state separation is, because I know that any Christian watching this interview is going to be confused. I've had so many people tell me that freedom of religion means freedom to worship Jesus as you see fit, and other faiths don't count, that It's only freedom of Christian religion.
Right. So freedom of religion, as the founders understood it, really means three things, like built together in different varying levels. The first is freedom of thought or conscience. Like you have the right to believe in your own mind what you will. No one can impose their beliefs on you. You can't be punished or prosecuted based on your beliefs. So that's the most core, central sort of part of freedom of religion, right? The second part is the right to worship or refrain from worshiping. So, for example, engage in prayer, not engage in prayer. So that's a really key aspect. And the third part, which is a little bit more touchy because it impacts other people, is expression, so religious expression. So if it doesn't harm other people, the right to sort of live out your faith or refrain from living out someone else's faith, right? But that's the most tricky aspect, because sometimes that can interfere with other people's rights. So when we talk about religious freedom, we're talking about different degrees. The first two aspects are by far the most, core part of religious freedom. And the third part, it's a little bit more varied. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I came up with this adage that the First Amendment contradicts the First Commandment. Because the First Commandment is, thou shalt have no other gods before me, but the First Amendment says you don't have to have any gods, and if you do have a god, it doesn't have to be this one. That's your constitutional right, because I agree with you, and I think all atheists would agree with you that having the right to free thought, to believe what you will, is the most basic of all human rights.
And that's what the founders thought as well.
And religion obviously doesn't want that. They don't want you to think freely. They have a belief system set up where you have prohibited beliefs and you have required beliefs, and you will be damned if you believe or don't believe. It has nothing to do with whether you're good or bad. You can sin all you want to, as long as you believe.
Right.
And if you don't believe, then it doesn't matter how good you are, because the only sin that will not be forgiven is the sin of disbelief. So
well, this is why the First Amendment sort of establishes there's two religion clauses in the First Amendment: the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Right. And the Establishment Clause says that the Congress shall not establish any religion.
Congress shall make no law even respecting the establishment of.
Exactly.
And I put in brackets the word "even" because I just want to stress that was the implication there. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, because once the state identifies, and I'm saying this obviously for my audience, once the state identifies or declares a state religion, that religion then gets endorsement, it becomes preferential.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else now has to show homage to that.
Right.
So Christians in Sharia countries have to show respect for the Muslim version of that religion.
Absolutely.
And
state power is inherently coercive, which is why this is essential that it not impose religious beliefs on people, because it cannot avoid being coercive. Right.
So when Trump says that he wants to bring prayer back into school,
right,
he's not only violating the decisive court case that established American Atheists,
mm-hmm.
he's also going against the Establishment Clause of the Constitution, that what he's proposing is not constitutional.
That's a great question. So what Trump is proposing, my understanding is it just sort of reiterates that students can pray in schools, which is true. Students can pray in schools.
Already.
However, to the degree that it implies that teachers have a First Amendment right to pray in schools, that is not true. That is not true, because teachers are employed by the government. They have the imprimatur of governmental power. So if a teacher starts praying or doing other religious activities, they're being coercive towards students automatically. They're sort of bringing the authority of the government and saying this is the right thing to believe, and that's coercive and not permitted. So that's what we're concerned about. But the students are permitted to pray in schools, and that's all there is to it. Like that, they've always been permitted, and to the degree that they're just saying they can pray in schools, we agree.
Well, since you're in Texas, I need to fill you in on this, the Merry Christmas bill that I protested, and I got in the newspaper for protesting it, and when they made it a bill, it made it a law anyway, mm-hmm. and Rick Perry signed it into law. He looked into the camera and said that freedom of religion is not freedom from religion. Yeah. Paraphrasing what I was saying and perverting it. The Merry Christmas bill encourages teachers to share their religious beliefs with their students, whatever their religious beliefs are. Because, of course, 90% Protestant Christian, they want everybody to share their 90% Protestant Christian beliefs. And anybody that isn't in that approved majority will automatically out themselves by sharing their religious beliefs and all that implies.
Right.
And so
stigmatization, discrimination, bullying, all sorts of bad things could happen to young people that happens.
Exactly. I mean, my wife, for example, was defending a Jehovah's Witness child when that Jehovah's Witness was being forced to pray, was being forced to tell the Pledge of Allegiance, right? When you have certain religious freedoms where people have religious privileges, which I don't agree with. I don't think anybody should have religious privileges, but we have them legally, so that allows Jehovah's Witnesses to sit down through the pledge. Their religion allows them that they don't have to do that. And so some other woman, some other teacher, saw that there was this child who was not standing for the pledge, burst into the classroom, and started scolding that child as if that child was atheist, criticizing that child for not believing in God in my wife's classroom. So my wife, who is now secretly atheist, can't tell everybody that she's atheist, then has to defend the religious right of the Jehovah's Witness against the Baptist.
I want to be clear about something too, though. It's not just a Jehovah's Witness who has that right. Everybody has that right. You don't have to stand for the pledge. We're actually defending a young woman in Texas who did not want to stand for the pledge, and she was bullied and harassed by her school, students, and by her school because of it. And and she's an atheist, so it does happen, and nobody has to stand for that reason. So it's not a religious. That issue is not a religious. Religious privilege certainly exists, but that issue is a right that everybody has. Nobody has to stand for the pledge. So I think that's important to know.
See, I wholly endorse that people have the right to believe what they will, but I don't believe that, you're in a religion that allows you to ignore the laws prohibiting peyote or marijuana.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
Your religion allows you to take wear your disguise during your driver's license picture so that we can't identify you? You know, these things should not apply.
That's what we call religious equality. So religious equality is basically the concept that your religious beliefs should neither give you any advantage or disadvantage against civil society's rules.
Okay. So a simple yes or no, but to my original question about, if you can, a simple yes or no, about what Trump is proposing, to bring prayer back into schools, is unconstitutional.
Well, that's a great question.
If the state is establishing if the state appears to be choosing a religion or declaring Christianity and endorsing Christianity in our public schools, that to me would be a violation of the Establishment Clause. And his Muslim ban was, of course, a violation of the Prohibition Clause.
Let's go back to the schools. I mean, I have to review the documents. It just came out a few hours ago. However, if they talk about establishing Christianity in schools, then 100%, yes, of course it's unconstitutional. If they say that teachers have the right to pray in schools, also unconstitutional. If they just say students have the right to pray in schools, because they do, that's fine. So it depends on what it says, really.
So can a teacher pray covertly in school?
Absolutely.
Or is the whole issue that the teacher just wants to be like the hypocrites and pray out where everyone can see them?
The issue is that if a teacher sort of expresses religious belief with the coercive power of the state, right, then they're, in a way, establishing that religion. They're giving that religion an official sort of seal of approval. And then students will react to that because the teacher is in a position of power compared to the students, and therefore their beliefs are seen as correct or true. And then that has all sorts of ramifications. Like the young person who's not of that religion might feel discriminated against. Other students might take their word and bully that student. You can see how it might reverberate down. So that's really the issue here. If a teacher, prays to herself in her classroom and no one's around, who cares? That's fine. That's perfectly allowable. Right?
It's all the demonstration of the prayer that's the issue.
Yes.
So I've given you what I think the casual passerby might need to know about American Atheists, about how we started, what our core concerns are, and I've given you one of my primary ones. And now I'd like to hear from you as a lawyer.
Right.
What are your concerns, and what do you see American Atheists doing or needing to do?
Sure. Well, I'm really excited to talk about our new report we just issued a couple weeks ago called The State of the Secular States. And you can find it at atheist.org/states. We released the first version of this in 2018, and this is the second version. And what it is we looked at all 50 states plus DC and Puerto Rico and looked at about 40 different types of laws and policies in every state that affect the separation of religion and government and religious equality. So it's like the first ever real catalog of what the separation of religion and government looks like in every state. And this is, I hope, a really powerful tool for advocates and for lawmakers, because you can turn to Indiana and say, okay, what good laws do we have on the books? What bad laws do we have on the books?
Is Indiana on one of the middle pages? Because it should be just easy reference.
I think it is, because they just open to it easily.
Yeah, and Missouri should be right in one of those middle pages too, because I think that they just passed a law a year or two ago prohibiting atheists from using the lack of religion as an argument in a court case.
Not quite right, and they did not pass that law, fortunately. So,
okay, that did not pass. Okay.
So there was a bill that was being considered that we were strongly fighting against, that said basically if you bring an Establishment Clause case, like a case about separation of religion and government, you can't do it under a pseudonym to protect yourself. You have to do it in your own name. And the reason for that is because we know when people bring these cases, sometimes they face a lot of public harassment. So they're trying to leverage this public harassment to avoid people enforcing the Constitution, right? And Madalyn Murray O'Hara herself, her house was burned down. Like, if that's one example, and this happens quite often. We've heard of people's pets being killed. We've heard of all sorts of horrible incidents. So basically, they're trying to leverage that to avoid stop people from enforcing their own constitutional rights. And we were really fought against that heavily. Unfortunately, it's back again this year, so we're going to be fighting against it again. Yeah, that's sort of what happens in states. But we talked a little bit earlier about why states are important. The federal level, it's hard to get things done right now. But the states, it's much easier to get changes made in the states. And there's so many of them that we're actually able to make real changes in the law that affect people's lives in a meaningful way. And I hope this resource gives local advocates and lawmakers who want to work on these issues some ideas about what they can do to enhance the separation of religion and government and religious equality, and really move things forward, because we don't have to rely on the federal government. The states are much closer to the people. Like, their laws are going to affect people's daily lives so much more, and that's where we can make all the difference.
I've argued before that you don't want to get a judge or a leader who is strong in their faith and firm in their convictions, which is what they usually advertise, right? That's one of the reasons that you would vote for me, because
Yeah.
what they're admitting is that they're biased and prejudiced, and they've already weighed your case regardless of the evidence, and they ain't going to change their mind because they're firm in their convictions, right? This is exactly the opposite of what we want in a leader. And now we have, there was a thing in, I think it was Missouri yesterday, no, not Michigan yesterday, for Trump doing his rally.
Okay.
And they were bragging about the great success they've had
Judges.
in putting these biased judges in all these positions to undermine everything that made our country great.
It's really scary. It's really scary. He's turned over about 25% of the judiciary at this stage. So about 25% of judges are Trump judges, which is incredible. Well, the federal judiciary. So we're talking about the federal level. So, that has going to have a real impact on the law for years to come, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. And it's already having an impact. I mean, look at the Bladensburg Cross case last year, right?
Tell me.
So this was a case at the Supreme Court, right, where there was a 40-foot tall concrete cross, a Latin cross, in Bladensburg, Maryland. And so it was created as they said, a war memorial. And basically, it was maintained on public land with public funding. And basically, the American Humanist Association sued, saying this was unconstitutional. And unfortunately, it was upheld, the theory being that it's been there so long that it sort of basically grandfathered. Its meaning has changed. It's become more of a monument about war and that sort of thing. So basically, even though it was established as a religious monument and it was clearly a religious symbol, because it was in place so long, it's okay.
The governor of this state did much the same thing with the Ten Commandments monument in Austin, the state capital. He said, "You guys should have complained about this earlier. It's too old."
How long has it been there?
Well, if you imagine the number of atheists when I became an activist, some couple dozen years ago, there was only a couple dozen years ago, there was only like 3 to 8% of atheists reporting on any poll. And the best you would ever get is 8%, and that was after Y2K. So prior to that, only 3 people, or only 3% would identify as atheists. And here in the South, thou dares not challenge the Ten Commandments at the state capitol. Nobody knew that you could do that. It took someone like Madeleine Murray O'Hair. And this now is like in the 1960s when people finally realized that, there's a problem here. So that monument had already been there for 30 years before we realized that, hey, that monument shouldn't be there.
And law changes. Once somebody wants in one place, you should be able to challenge it in other places, right? Because that's the entire point. I have to point this out. The First Amendment is called the First Amendment because it's supposed to be the most important. That's why they placed it first, right?
Well, most people in this state aren't aware that there's another one before that second one.
Exactly. But imagine if the argument was made that, well, the Second Amendment doesn't apply right now because we've had this law against guns for 30 years, and therefore, we get to keep it. Right? I mean, that would never hold. No one would buy that argument. But for some reason, the First Amendment is applying this. I mean, that's how it's being limited based on the fact that it's old. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, that would be my argument. But of course, anything that allows the religious right to have that foot in the door, to keep creaking the door open wider, they'll do. And
that's what they did with this ruling. Because, I mean, okay, it's one thing to say old things are allowable, but who decides what old is? What is the gap? This was, I think, I don't remember exactly, like 50 or 60 years old, right? But okay, let's say if it was 40 years, 20 years, 10 years. What if it was last year? What point does it become old? It's a very slippery slope.
So it's not like there's a hardcore documented statute of limitations?
No, this is the problem with Supreme Court cases. They don't, they're going to be interpreted over and over again by the courts.
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought maybe would be hopeful in this miserable situation where the religious right owns and controls everything and had taken over 25% of the judiciary and so forth, and they really run everything at every level of state and federal government, because I mean the Board of Education, every here in Texas at least. I mean I've attended like what the I can't remember the small city council.
Okay.
Right. I mean, you attend city council meetings and they still do prayers, and they're very, very hateful if somebody brings a case for secularism to the city council. They have this little partition in this one place that I went to, it's only about this high, where everybody's got their phones out, and they're all looking at their phones, and if you screen capture what they're saying on Facebook, they're all ridiculing the person giving the testimony.
Wow.
About what a heathen, they're going to hell. This is, and we're trying to plead a case with your facts, and to people who don't care about facts. And who just don't care about reality. So my thought is that we're going to go into a dark place, and there's no way to not do that at this point. But the light at the end of the tunnel may be that Ireland was run by the Catholic Church. They had a completely religious government, and not so much in the populace.
Yeah. I
was surprised at how few religious Irishmen there were anymore. Now you go back 20 years ago, it might have been different. But we did a World Atheist Conference in Dublin in 2011, and we did it there just to challenge their blasphemy law. Yeah. We're blaspheming here. Come get us. And at the same time that we were doing that, there was another guy. There was a Catholic activist from the United States who went to Dublin on the same weekend that we were there. Coincidentally, didn't know about us, and he's on the same street too. It's just right down the street from us. Has no idea that this is going on, and he's conducting a poll of passerby to find out how religious is Ireland. And he was dismayed that out of 1 out of 20 reported that they believed in God.
Wow.
Everybody else is atheist.
I mean, yeah, the overreach we're seeing is driving people away from religion. This sort of behavior by the religious right groups, and people are fleeing in droves. We see the rise of, I mean, you've talked about this so much, the rise of the nuns. I mean, and that does not mean they're all non-religious, but a good significant portion of them are, right? And we're just getting more and more secular as a nation over time. And, I feel like, I know you live here in Texas, which is fantastic, but I grew up in New Jersey. It is very different there. And so I think that's also worth noting. I mean, I feel like, yes, it's very religiously oppressive in many areas of the country. However, other areas are less religiously oppressive. And I think that's important to note. Over time, things will become more like the latter. So I am hopeful. We are in a dark place, and I think we're going to have our law go through some difficult period of time. At the same time, there's certainly light at the end of the tunnel. And I think demographics are our hope, right, for the future.
Well, I see us going to where Ireland was, where the government is becoming more and more religious, but the populace is becoming less and less so. And so that's at least hopeful. I mean, what is going to happen when you have a religious government that wants to impose all of these absurd laws? We can see they're absurd. We can show that they're absurd. But if you're just determined to believe, no matter what, you're never going to see anything, I guess. But I do see that the population is not going to tolerate that kind of behavior that the right-wing extremists are trying to push.
I think a really great example is Trump's denial of care rules around health care. So he pushed these really broad denial of care rules where people could basically not offer medical services that they disagree with on a religious basis, right? And that doesn't just affect one category of people. That could be anything. I mean, maybe disapprove of, I don't know, overweight people and say, I'm not going to give you a heart medication. It could be anything. Like, it's so broad. It's crazy. And I feel like that has fortunately been stopped by the courts, and I hope that will continue to be stopped by the courts because it's ridiculous, the rule. However, if it wasn't, I feel like that's the sort of thing that will get a giant backlash once it starts to affect people in their daily lives, because it will. That's the sort of thing that will affect people, And there's lots of issues like that Trump keeps pushing.
Now, most of the religious right seems to be fueled by the single issue. Right? They manage to get, if you can get all these people to rally together over this one abhorrent thing that they can get everybody excited about, well then you can attach to that all of the other criminality that you want to push through. As long as you've got the support base fired up on that one more of what they think is a moral issue, and they'll allow you to do everything else, much like with the Second Amendment. If you let people have their guns, they'll feel safe even though they don't realize that you're taking all these other rights away.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it's large part it's been abortion over the years. That's been the real galvanizing force for the right wing, and it continues to be. It drives elections, and it drives a lot of the judge nominations are all about abortion in a way. Everything traces back to it. And I find that especially fascinating because if you look at the history of abortion in this country, you know, when Roe v. Wade passed, the majority of the religious, the Baptists and other religious folks, they thought abortion was fine. This all came apart. It's all this big campaign to change their mind and establish control over people via religion. I'm surprised more people don't see that. Like especially older folks that were alive then, when abortion was fine one year, and the next year it's the worst thing in the world.
I saw something amazing today. Somebody's arguing that I'm completely immoral because I advocate for abortion. I said, yes, but I'm advocating for moral reasons, which you don't understand because you won't hear the arguments. There was a reason the Supreme Court said that this should be law.
Right.
They heard the arguments that you won't listen to. You just screamed they're killing babies when in fact we're not killing babies.
Right.
And there's a hell of a lot more nuance to it. Even if that were the case, there's still other nuance to justify that if you'll just hear it out. And especially when you try to use the Bible as your justification for this. Let me show you Numbers 5, and let's talk about that chapter for a bit. And the thing that surprised me today was that I had a religious believer who's criticizing me because I'm an atheist, so therefore I can't know what honesty is. He says it's illogical for me to declare that dishonesty is immoral because I'm atheist. Which in my interpretation just means that I have an objective moral standard, and I actually do, where he doesn't.
Right.
He has the subjective opinion of somebody who's pretending to speak for God's subjective opinion. But that's not an objective standard because it doesn't give us the criteria by which we can determine whether something, a given example of anything, is moral or not. I don't have to go to the subject or go to the king and ask him, is this moral, and have him decide on that would be subjective. Now we have the criteria that explains whether this is moral or not. But anyway, this guy sees my argument for how the Bible advocates for abortion. So you can't, and God's got to be completely okay with this. Half of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. Anyway, that's clearly God's fault, right?
I don't see how you can argue otherwise. I mean, if you believe He designed the system, then
exactly. So, but the amazing thing is that this believer who hates me, and comes back and admitted that that's the Numbers 5 is actually advocating abortion. I concede. Outstanding. Yeah. Because how often does that happen?
Yeah. I mean, actually reading the Bible and changing your mind about something? Not very often. Yeah. Interesting.
So what do you see from here on? What's the future of American Atheists?
Well, I feel like we've done a really great job as far as state policy work, state advocacy and legislation, and I really want to see us continue to move in that direction. For example, we'd really like to get a state-level leader, a state director in every state, and work with local communities to help build stronger communities, like help groups come together, give affiliates resources through our ACES program, and then amplify our state-level work with those groups.
Can you name one or two states that don't have directors right now?
I don't think California does.
Isn't that funny?
It is. It is very funny because they have tons of atheists, but they don't have a state director. So that's a great one, and there's many others. But I feel, we definitely need to get some to round out the rest of the states. And I feel like our movement needs more experience in state advocacy. We're starting to get there. We've really been pushing over the last couple of years, but it's going to take some time to really focus and learn about what that means and how we engage with it and how we build other partners. You can't do state advocacy by yourself. You need to build coalitions around things you want. Like, for example, we have a lot of overlap with reproductive rights groups and with LGBT groups and with civil rights groups. So how do we work together to advance our mutual agendas?
One of the challenges that I saw when I was Texas State Director was that I was expecting that people were going to be calling me from all over the state to tell me about these egregious things going on, but they don't. The reason that they don't is because we're immersed in the South, and when they put up, in God we trust, and they mount crosses all over your school and put pictures of Jesus in every classroom, nobody says a word, and that's frustrating to me. I had another problem that I had was a parent called me once upon a time when he had a child that was taking an AP class in high school for college credit, and it was supposed to be in zoology. Now, if any subject ever required evolution, certainly that would be, you can't avoid evolution if you're talking about zoology, right?
Yes.
So they didn't have anybody with any kind of biological degree teaching this class. They had a coach.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody with like an associate's degree maybe is teaching this class. And the coach spent 6 weeks of class time having the kids do mock debates using the written material of Ann Coulter.
Okay.
And this parent is rightfully outraged
Yeah.
at this, right? And so he wants me to do something about it. And I told him, okay, well, this is what we need to gather evidence. That's the big thing. We don't make the accusation. We gather the evidence. Make sure you have something to show in court, not
Mm-hmm.
something to stuff in the teacher's face.
Right.
Right, so let's get that. So the first thing you're going to do is write him back, ask him for clarification. Did you really tell my son blank?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Get the course materials.
Yeah, and if you want to just nip it in the bud right now, don't blind carbon copy me and American Atheists and the Freedom from Religion Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and I listed off a handful of other activist groups. And I said, just let him, and the principal, of course, make sure that the principal is the first address on there, and all of these others. 30 minutes later, the teacher contacts back and says he was just kidding.
Just kidding.
6 weeks of class time on Ann Coulter. Just kidding. JK, my excuse.
Wow. Yeah. And I wonder how often this happens because we have no way of knowing.
I hear horror stories.
This is the
from
problem with
people.
these Bible class bills we're seeing in states too, because they're not taught in a constitutional way, right? It's possible to teach the Bible in a constitutional way in schools, like, comparative religion, that sort of thing is possible.
You think anybody's going to crack open a Quran in a Texas public school?
I don't. That's the problem. That's the problem. They don't teach it that way, and there's no oversight of it. And it's the same sort of thing you're talking about. Like, if you just let loose this group of people who have no idea how to do this, they usually just bring a local pastor, which is unacceptable, and it becomes a Sunday school, right? And it's not constitutional, it's not acceptable. And if we learn about it, if you report it to us, we would love to take action on that.
Okay. So, unless you have some other upcoming thing that you want to see American Atheists do, or that you're hoping to see.
I do have one thing I want to just mention.
What's that?
We did, towards the end of last year, we announced the U.S. Secular Survey, which is the largest survey ever done in this country of non-religious and atheist people. And so we got about 34,000 respondents, which is an amazing amount of support. And we are going to be launching our report on it, I think, just in time for our conference in April. So I just want to also plug our conference is in April in Phoenix this year, and it's always an amazing time, and we'd love everyone to come out. And I'll tell you more about this great survey. It's really important that we learn more about the non-religious community because it's hard to engage in advocacy for the group unless we actually know something about them. It's really key. So we need to know, first of all, what they want, what their experiences are like, what they're facing in their daily lives, and then we're much better position to go into lawmakers' offices and say, well, this is the problem. In schools, we're seeing this every day, right? So it's really key, and we're finally going to have that data, and I'm really, really proud we're able to make that happen.
And on the plug for American Atheists, I just want to say that the American Atheist National Convention is one of the best annual events to go to. They pick places that are very strongly religious, just so they can make a little bit of a little contrast there. And this year it's going to be in Phoenix, Arizona. Very excited about that. I've lived all around there. I have old friends there, and I'm very stoked to finally bring my friends who are hesitant to call themselves atheists, but they're atheists, and bring them in and let them know that there are other people who think like that. And that'll be outstanding. I'm working on some other peripheral activities. Unfortunately, I have to be in London the weekend before, so I don't have as much time as I wanted to devote to that. But I'll be there for a few days after, and maybe do some things with like the local pastors and whatnot.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'd like to set up some political debates with the Secular Coalition for America in Phoenix.
They're a great organization.
And other local activist groups, and just take advantage of the fact that we're going to be there and make a bit of an impact. Put a footprint.
Well, that's why we pick these states that are more religiously conservative. Like, I remember we were in Oklahoma City 2 years ago, right? And I think we had 400 people show up day of who just heard about the conference and came. 400. Because this is the environment, that they have zero community. They see everybody around them is religious, and there's a real thirst for community.
And that conference is going to be on Easter weekend, by the way, because we know everybody's got the day off. So
every year, Easter weekend is American Atheists Conference. So
perfect. I mean, nobody's doing anything else that time.
And the hotels are cheap. So
brilliant. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think not.
Okay, we're going to go eat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.